I te tuatahi, ka mihi au ki te kaihanga o ngā mea katoa. Ko ngā mate o te wā, tai atu ki te whanaunga o Edward, ko David Ellison. Haere, haere, haere atu rā. Haere ki o tūpuna, kia whakawhitirangi tia. Moi mai, moi mai, moi mai rā. Ki tō tātou kai kōrero i tēnei pō, te manukura, Edward, te upoko o te runaka o tākau, he hōnore nui tēnei. Tuku maha ngā taringa e tatari ana ki te rongo i au kōrero, kia mohio ai ake ai, kia marama ake ai, e pāna ki tēnei mea whakahirehire te tiriti o Waitangi. Nō reira, tēnā koe, nau mai, haere mai, tauti mai. Kia a koutou katoa, ko mine mai nei tēnei pō, he mihi mahana ki a koutou katoa, nau mai, haere mai, ki tēnei whare karikia, he whare he momo horo I tēnei wā, no te mea kei whakatika tawa hora rā. Me poto taku paipa, no reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Paul Marie, good evening. I'm David Pulteney. I'm the presbyter for this church and the wider Dunedin Methodist Parish. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the commencement of this year's series of Gibson Memorial lectures. This lecture and all the others will be available to watch later on the Mornington Methodist YouTube channel. A couple of housekeeping things. You'll have noticed the art installation as you came into the building. Our hall has been slightly strengthened, which means our lavatories are out of bounds. We do have some portaloos in the garden at the back, and the door. Just ask, someone will point to you. I had a wedding just before Christmas, and I just crossed my fingers the bride didn't need to go. She didn't. But I'll hand you over now to George, who will welcome our speaker.
My name is George Davis. I'm a member of this church, and it is with great pleasure that I want to introduce the Otaka Kaumātua and Kaitiaki, Edward Ellison, to give the premier talk of Series 2. Series 1 was 2024 with 5 talks. Series 2 this year is planned to be 6 talks, but the first is with Edward. And his topic will be Ka Muri, a Maori proverb meaning walking backwards into the future. This has significant meaning, which I have no doubt Edward will explain to you in the progress of the talk. Now we will have Reverend Don Phillips.
Greetings, friends. Greetings particularly to you, Edward, old friend. Tangata whakaara nui, man of wisdom. I think of myself as an historian, and there is a particular phrase that has caught my attention over, I suppose, a number of years, and it has that strange ring appropriate to Dunedin with toitu. Toitu, unchanging, unchanged. Toitu te kupu. Toitu te mana. Toitu te whenua. Unchanging, language, unchanging mana, unchanging people, land. That's what we try to grasp at this present moment when we live in a world of disastrous change in some respects. We want to make sense of it. And I believe that by listening to the tangata whenua of this land, we can learn so much because of their very particular way of expressing their attitude to the past. I think it would be fairly true to say that for people of European heritage, such as myself, we tend to think of change as being always for the better. That simply isn't true. What can we do to learn from our past? One thing that we must do much more keenly, and I say this at the time of our inner uncertainties about te tiriti, is to hear our treaty partner. And I use that word very carefully because for the Methodist Church at least, its law book states that it is in treaty partnership with the tangata whenua through te tiriti or waitangi. So it's very appropriate at this time of this particular year, 2025, when the treaty is so much in our mind, that we listen to our, let me say, elder brothers and sisters. And for us, and for me in particular, and I want to be a little bit more personal here, the Ellison family represent exactly that sense of belonging, of long belonging, but of being up with the play, being part of today. We listened to your daughter at our last talk speaking about language, and now we are here with you, Edward, talking about what you want to talk about. But I want to finish with a little word of compliment which came from a very important person, your cousin David, who died just 2 or 3 weeks ago. Through the good offices of Greg Hewson, I visited with David, and we talked about all sorts of things. When I talked about Otakao, his face lit up, and he said something like, "They're in good hands." And that's a compliment, and I'm sure he meant it from the heart. He did. So I welcome you to talk to us with David's approbation. Sorry. Stand and join with me if you can. Tamanaka Marie, Tamata tua, tenetono ma, arohaina mai. Edward.
Tuatahi ko tēnei mihi atu ki a koe te whaia mō tō karakia, tūwhiratia, tapo nei, I tautoko ana ngā mihi ki rātou ngā mate, kua hinga, kua wehi atu, me o rātou hurino o te whare, tēnā rā koutou. Thank you, George and Donald, for the welcome and introduction, and one and all, ngā mihi atu kia koutou katoa. I have been here before, in this church before, and it's good to return, and thank you for the invitation to speak at the Colin Gibson Talks. I used to know Colin many years ago as well. Wonderful person. That image that we see on the screen there now is at a place called Takiharuru, which you might otherwise know as Pilot's Beach. The last beach on the way out toward Taiaroa Head, or that headland you can see there is Pukekura. And that double-hulled waka It's what quite a number of people across the Pacific have been rekindling, the knowledge of navigation and the way that our people used to travel. And that waka there has been to Rarotonga and elsewhere. I've not been lucky enough to be on it, but the talk I'm giving talks about and refers to our prehistory, pre-contact, all of that knowledge and way of doing things, and the knowledge we have of ocean sailing, navigating, and building our particular Southern Pacific culture, which existed prior to the treaty. The talk is really going to be just enlightening ourselves around the treaty itself. Now I'll see if this works. It does. Great. So we've moved now further into the harbour, and using that expression, Vikings of the Pacific, really our ancestors were fantastic seamen, navigators, traversing vast oceans, more so than the people who we know as the Vikings, over many thousands of years. The very important link in this that links us to Hawaii, to the Easter Islands, and up into near the Melanesians. Now, we were probably here reasonably comfortable in our place, exercising our rakatira taka authority in our place here under the succession of generations here, and I'm talking particularly at Otako. The first known European contact in the Otago Harbour was in 1809, and following that there was also, in that era, we had the invasion down from Kapiti by Te Rauparaha, who is represented in that picture there. He had gained a lot of muskets off his connection with the early Europeans, and so he is no contest for a lot of our people, and caused a lot of devastation in the upper part of our tribal territory and right down to Banks Peninsula. So it really fell to the people here, Taiaro, Karatai, Tuawaiki, and other chiefs to muster their resources and forces. They traded, they even sold land to obtain muskets. The determination was to regain their tribal takiwā, to assert their rakatira taka over that traditional territory right way north of Kaikoura. And they made a number of expeditions in the 1830s. Quite a lot of that resource, whale boats, and the weapons were obtained through the whalers and the whalers. They're operating around the coast as well. And so they made excursions up there trying to make contact with Te Rauparaha, and they did at different times. In some of those expeditions, they were frustrated and didn't manage to come to blows with Te Rauparaha, but they, through the period of the 1830s, they pushed him back out of the tribal territory. Why I'm expressing this is that the importance of rakatira taka, which you hear and read about in the treaty, but also the importance of that in terms of your place, your ancestral lands, your relations who may have been displaced. It was a huge thing for our people to reassert their authority over their traditional lands. And so by the 1835s, that was reasonably well in place, but they were still keeping an eye on the Cook Strait from time to time. And then in 1840, the treaty was signed. Encouraged in part, of course, to help bring peace, but also to settle the Europeans who were living here, 2,000 or 3,000 of them in the north and quite a few in the south. Otako was the second busiest port in New Zealand in the 1830s, so they understood what was probably Kororareka, I think it was called. And so all of these things were happening in the space of 30 years. A lot of change that our people saw. There was benefits and there was also threats and challenges. The treaty was signed at Pokakura, there, where that headland is, probably near the beach that was in that first photo. It was signed on the 13th of June, 1840. Karatai, my ancestor, was a signatory, as was a relative of his, or a nephew of Taiaroa, Korako, signed the treaty also. And there was a commitment. Rangatira, Mana, applied to that treaty and for a new commitment to a new future, which included the right for the Queen Victoria or his subjects to govern New Zealand forever, subject to recognising the rakatira taka of the tangata whenua. So it was in that vein. It wasn't handing sovereignty to Queen Victoria. There was a right to govern, but subject to that, the role and authority of Rangatira over their lands, their resources, and way of doing things. And it was something to be managed and worked, a journey, really. It was also signed in two other places, in Te Waipounamu, near Akaroa and at Ruapukui Island in Fovo Strait. So the articles of the treaty, well, there it is there, to govern, contingent on protecting Māori rakatira taka and the tino rakatira taka retained by chiefs. As I said, the effort and resource commitment to regain authority over the balance of the tribal takiwā was the exercise of tino rakatira taka. It was not something they were going to sign away on the beach at Pokakura easily to people who had just arrived and were outnumbered by, 50 to 1 anyway in this country. So just giving that context, at that time when the treaty was signed, the expectation of the chiefs who signed and the promise of the same rights that they would receive equal to the British subjects, that was guaranteed as well. So it wasn't long after that the breaches of the treaty started to occur. It was like as soon as the treaty was, the print was dry, things started to occur that had the chiefs questioning what they had done, really. Taiaroa himself on his last year, he left instructions to his children and his people to continue the fight, to correct and see that the promises that were made through the treaty, but also particularly through the land sales, were fulfilled. He felt he had made a mistake shortly after the treaty being signed, selling the Otako block, in which the Dunedin city now is a part of that sale, which went right down to Clinton, out to Nuggets, back to Pokakura and across to a place called Purehu, which is a wee bit further north than Haywards Point, an area of about 500,000 acres. Anyway, I can't quite read that screen, so I'll look at this here. So the land sales conducted by the New Zealand Land Company were in breach of the treaty, the preemption principle that was in the treaty preamble, to ensure that the Crown were the facilitators of any sales so that it did not disadvantage the Indigenous people or the people of New Zealand. The New Zealand Land Company was an independent company of the Crown, independent of the Crown. They purchased the Otako block, made certain promises, and of course they got into trouble. Those promises were not fulfilled, And that was the beginning of a downward spiral for our people here at Otako. It bypassed the preemption of land sales via the Crown. And a basis, and that happened right across all of our land sales across the South Island, the basis of the Kaitahu grievances was the failure to keep those the contracts, fulfil the contracts, and the inability, once those land sales had occurred, to access over time many of their important mahinga kai, or places where they gathered their food and resources, and needed to go seasonally to live because the reserves that they were retained from sale were insufficient. They were landless and were destitute, literally destitute, by the 1860s. So it was a generational uphill struggle, and of course on top of that, the Crown set up government, then the colonial, it became very colonial driven, and there was a further issue for our people. They couldn't treat with the colonial people like they could or thought they were going to with Queen Victoria. They would make their visits to try and visit with the Queen to raise their issues. So, long story short, that went on for generations. Our people put petitions in, there were commissions held, people borrowed money on their meagre land holdings to assemble, build wharenui, or wharirunanga they called them, to have their land meetings, talk about their issues and work out how they were going to resolve these matters. And they took these cases over generations to Wellington. Commissions came around and heard them, and the Crown made some meagre offerings. Landless natives were allowed lands, but they were allocated in the most remote, inhospitable places that no one could go and live anyway. And they offered some of that land to people who were from other tribes on Stewart Island and elsewhere. So it was pretty, any settlements were dispersed in a very odd and unusual way. So all of that, over generations, people got into Parliament. Hori Kirei Taiaroa from home, and Huani Parata from Waikuiti, and others tried to do their best in Parliament to make changes, bring to fruition the claim for Ngaitahu. Nothing worked, basically. And so our people slowly dispersed from their lands to make a living. We lost a lot of those people to the tribe. They are slowly coming back in now. I think we number 90,000. When we took the claim in 87, there might have been 15,000. And so post-settlement, a lot of people, in the name of Ngaitahu, prior to the Waitangi Tribunal sitting in 1987, was pretty well unknown in Te Waiponamu, really. And it's really through the Waitangi Tribunal, and particularly the negotiations, we became well known, but in a very negative way. But, you know, they say any publicity is good publicity. We've never been forgotten post the settlement, but people had a pretty jaundiced view of what we might do, and what we might do to people who are living here, and any settlement that we received. Anyway, that Waitangi Tribunal process was set up, though, on the back of a lot of agitation from Māori across the country, including Ngaitahu, but, you know, commonly the Bastion Point case, Land March, Motunui, e Taranaki, the pollution of Kaituna Stream and Rotorua, pollution in the Manukau Harbour, all of the tangata whenua in those places were agitating and up in arms, really, as well as our young people in the Auckland Technical Institute over people using the haka in an inappropriate way. And even Nada Glavish saying kia ora on the phone. But what I'm saying is the tribunal and the arrival of treaty principles wasn't a gift or a token of goodwill from the Crown. It was really driven by pressure from Māori over time with few resources and committed to upholding their rangatiratanga. So 75, the Waitangi Tribunal was established. 85, they were allowed to backdate grievances to the 6th of February 1840, and that's when it really started to roll. We started to see the country address the grievances and they were across every single tribe, every single hapu, across the country, to roll back and address. One of the biggest things for our people was the apology, believe it or not. There was a moving thing because we all knew that our previous generations followed the rule of law to try and get these things rectified and failed. And they knew through these, it was the talk around in the homes in Marae, that there was a depth to that journey, and it was an honouring of their ancestors. And the Kaitahu Waitangi Tribunal year 1986, they went around the island, but we negotiated and settled in 1998 the Ngaitahu Claim Settlement Act, included an apology, a whole lot of mechanisms to ensure that regional councils, government departments followed more consistently the requirements of the law. It was very spasmodic, and it often just depended on an individual to do the right thing. It wasn't built into their structure and way of doing things in these authorities. And so many of the mechanisms were no different to what was potentially available, for example, in the RMA, but it gave a pattern of these instruments across the whole tribal area. The idea was that we would see some uniformity and consistency of us being engaged on people wanting water, doing things, consents, policy plan changes, you name it, on land, water and sea. So that was quite a good thing, really, and we set up Te Rūninga o Ngaitahu. There was a quantum settlement of 170 million. It was about 2 cents in the dollar on what our real loss was. So, but our people were positive and thought there was the opportunity and the building block we needed to move forward. And really, post-settlement, when that settlement was signed, I thought that the South Island community turned a corner. They seemed to get it. And I don't think we've sort of fallen out of step with our community since then. That's my personal view. It's been a positive pathway forward, a win-win, I think, for the South Island, for our tribal territory and the communities we live with. And so, have I got this? Yes. Talked about that. Go to the next one. And so, but importantly, internally to the tribe, it allowed a renaissance in our language and culture. It's been a huge growth on our marae. All our marae have been refurbished again, and they're in good heart. And the activity on marae is growing significantly. We established things like kotahi mano kaika, which is language in 1,000 homes. If it can be spoken in the home, it would perpetuate its survival and use into the future. And we've been active in so many ways. We've built partnerships across the communities, those that are particularly important, legislatively of course, but right through and across our communities. We have visible part and active, and many people approach us out of the fact that we are the treaty partner here in this region, so we have many duties as well to uphold and undertake. So Rakatirataka and Mana Motuhake has been asserted and it's growing. I say we're in the we've just come out of a winter, and the settlement heralded in the spring, and really I think we're still there. I personally think the fulfilment of our settlement and our mana motuhake is still some way off. We're growing and going forward though. We do still have many bad statistics, which is commonly talked about, common across all Māori demographics, and so there are major challenges for us to go forward. And we often see that if we can get those programs, stand them up and do them our way, they are better. They have better reach, better uptake, better outcomes, and quicker return for the investment had. So that's quite important in health, including in education, kohanga reo, kura kaupapa, even Māori universities. Very important in terms of building the strength, vitality, and the ability to really take up our role as tangata whenua, of this country. And, as I've said, really, we emerged from the shadows. And in my lifetime, I can remember that. Our people, when we met on the marae, often back in the day, didn't talk about much outside of the marae gate, because no one talked to them, consulted them. There was no legislative requirement for people to do that. And that's really what the part of this kōrero is about, to be honest, because we have this strange thing called the Treaty Principles Bill, and I think that's where that would take us back to in a very short space of time. And that's been driven, I think, by people who haven't totally understood the journey New Zealand's on, and will like to return to what they thought was the good old days, when they didn't have to hear about the treaty, didn't have to understand about the bicultural nature of the country, and didn't feel threatened. And that's how I see it. People who hunger for those days, which to us was really the pinnacle of colonisation, really, where we were just marginalised, disenfranchised, and really that's the source of a lot of the social, cultural health ills in many respects that our people suffer. One size fits all doesn't work, and we understand that. And I think New Zealand has learnt a lot over the last 50 years to understand the reality of that. So the purpose of my talk really is to the danger of that sort of thinking and misrepresenting the facts, really, about privilege, about race. Why I went back to that early history, that's our way of doing things. That's how we identified with the land and we named the place. Our stories are in the land. This is our culture, this is our heritage, and that's how the people built their rakatirataka and how they identify with mana. Mana is broader than the person. It actually, in our case, in our belief, goes back to the beginnings. The very beginning of this land, the source of mauri or water, all of those things, it's why it's revered. So we have a different view. It's a different world view. That's what I'm saying, and we think that world view is relevant to what we do here in New Zealand and the way we should order ourselves and respect things, and I think that's what we've been talking with each other about. I mean, the way we've worked with the Crown over years, it's around mana and respect. Mana for everyone involved, the signatories, the hapu, the Crown, the people who are living here and who've come to live here. It's about a continuing journey. It's not a destination. We don't get to a point and say that's done. Now we can revert back to no principles. No, it goes on forever. And we build through that knowledge and respect and mana. So I think these things are very important and are absent in the bill that is going through the select committee process now. And I'm heartened from what I've seen, amazing presentations to the select committee, enlightening that process so much. So see if there's anything else on my... So yeah, it's partnership and growth really, a win-win. Bring Indigenous voice into the equation, revitalisation of our culture and reversing negative trends. And this is really where I've got to, I think. That there is a reaction to treaty principles in the bill, a narrow focus, a narrow view, not keen to see Māori take their role back as treaty partners, very divisive and misinformation are the tactics, and a desire to go back to the good old days, a step backwards. See if I've left time for questions. And that's my last slide. So we do have time for questions. Kia ora tātou.
You need to use a microphone for the questioners. Yes, exactly. That one. Anybody who would like to make a comment or question Edward, please come up and stand at the rostrum here, and you'll be heard better than I am at the moment through the microphone. You can tell. You have to get about hands width from the microphone itself to actually make it be heard, and then you can speak in a normal tone. So, anybody got questions for Edward? Or want to make comments? Come on up, Doctor.
O Māori e kamata Ellison. Thanks very much for speaking. I don't want to detract from the appalling current treaty principles bill. So absolutely agree, can't believe that's happening. But I have the impression that now in the things that I'm involved in, when people have initiatives for change culturally or socially or governmentally, I'm primarily in medical areas and alpine areas, that it almost seems taken for granted that at least iwi opinions and ways of doing things will be considered. So I'm interested to know that A, whether you agree that is happening a whole lot more, or whether that's just my wrong impression, but B, whether you feel like that's kind of just ticking the box but no attention's paid to that.
Kia ora, thank you for that. Look, I believe it's growing and in a positive way and strongly, really, in all sectors. The areas that I work in, there are particular leaders who are visionary as well, who help that, understand it, get it, and yeah, look, it is a given in many respects that even if the Treaty Principles Bill progressed, some of that would continue, but there are 20 other pieces of legislation that are going to be reviewed and for whether the treaty principles are relevant or not. And I think, well, with that, a change like that would cause confusion, cause a lot of legal contest to try and understand what the change was, and I think would not help the continued growth in understanding of that, the importance of the tangata whenua, tangata tiriti, bicultural journey, really. I think there's a risk there, honestly, yeah.
Yeah. So currently, though, you think that it is more than just a cursory kind of make the iwi happy, but people are actually, so European New Zealanders are paying attention to Māoritanga?
Oh yeah, look, from my involvement over the years, night and day.
That's great.
Awareness, confident in so many areas that it's going well. I mean, some of this work is huge. The university Tiriti-led process is easy to say, but it's a huge exercise to apply. It'll take time, a huge amount of time. The regional council's doing great work, but triennials and ministers can easily, they just put emergency legislation through to stop them considering notifying their plan. So there are many factors outside, swirling around, that will distort what good people are doing, potentially. But an awful lot of goodwill and good people doing good work across the whole community. Yep, thanks.
Tēnā koe koro. What do you hear from your rangatahi as to how they see the way forward?
Kia ora, thank you for that. Our rangatahi who have had more access to our culture, both through school and more activity on the marae, are much more learned, even learning te reo. They see that interconnectivity with nature for a start. They're close to our environment, which is part of our identity. They are worried about continued decline in water biodiversity. So they have more of a holistic view, both of their place and their surroundings. The younger ones who've got a Māori name, or look, Māori are quite worried. They personally feel that it's against them. They take it personally, what they hear and see in the media. So there is some discord, some of our whānau are disconcerted in that way. But on the other hand, like if you're looking at Matatini and many other kaupapa, the kotahi tangahui that have gone around the island and the hikoi, I think the horses bolted. That's my personal view, but we've got to encourage them.
Edward, I would just like to add to the horse being bolted. When I was at university in the 1960s, I suppose there were about 20 to 30 Maori students. That's in the whole university of 3,000. Now we have a university of 22,000 with about 2,000 to 3,000 lecturers, and we have titumu. We have a cradle of Maori learning into which characters like myself have to be plunged. It's like immersion in cold water. I had not studied any Maori until I was told I had to by Barbara Brooks in the history department as a precursor to my gaining a doctorate. And so I thought, oh my God, I'll get it over with like an injection at first. Not such a wise idea, because I really had to work hard in that sort of 8 weeks to come out of it with a good mark. Unfortunately, I haven't used enough of it in the meanwhile to remember about 80% of it or more. But it told me a couple of things. It told me that Maori, te reo, and Korero was a force in the university as opposed to it not being a force in the 1960s. It's in your face. Whether you like it or not, it's there. It's part of our New Zealand-ness, our Aotearoa, should I say it, ness. And I like it. As an ex-teacher, I like it. It's good. Unfortunately, some of the backbone people in parts of the South and North Island who think their farming communities are threatened by Maori inclinations towards their land, which their people have had for 4, 5, 6 generations. They don't know much, really. There were quite a number of generations of Maori before them. But what needs to happen is a sense of justice. It must be just for all. And that's where legal help comes in.
If I could just add about the question about what our rangatahi think, another thing we've been doing in Dunedin and other parts of Otago, but particularly Dunedin, at the invitation of the city and others, is artwork, cultural narratives, because our young people says, you don't see us. You can go into Dunedin, you wouldn't know we existed. And the same's happened in Christchurch post-earthquake. It's just that artwork and reflection of place names and what have you, all very important, subtle, and not too much in your face, but I think it just adds to that cultural depth of place, and it's really important to our young people to see that as well.
Kia ora, Edward. Just with David Ellison's death so recent in our memory, and the tangi and the funeral, just to mention how much learning there is there for us all, for Tawiwi, to be part of the tangi and funeral process, which is, I think, a really far more comprehensive model, if you want to call it that, for grief, where at every stage of the tangi there is a purpose, and there is the receiving of the person into their spiritual home, and the grief that goes on all through the night, and people come and go, and then the funeral service, and then the burial, and then the whānau are received back into the world of light. So at every stage of the process there is a purpose, and our funeral rituals are very inadequate when I compare what I went through the last few days at Puketeraki. So that's just one example of the richness of the cultural exchange, that it's not Pākehā and Tawiwi should not be thinking, oh, this is a burden, this is a requirement. I think it's better to think of it as what a blessing to be a recipient of that sort of manaakitanga and hospitality and just beautiful people. So thank you for that.
Kia ora, Greg. Yeah, that was one thing that did survive quite intact through time, was the tangi, which is really about both honouring the person who's gone but supporting the people who are bereaved and allowing them time. And it's amazing, if you sit through a whole tangi, you learn something about the person you didn't really know often. Because people come from all quarters who they've been associated with, and they'll talk about that person. It's amazing, really. It's just spiritually uplifting and connecting. And of course it's just eating kai together in the whare kai, and meeting and seeing relations and connecting. We often complain about we always meet at tangi, but there are really strong elements around it that keeps that connectivity and the strength of whanaungatanga. And so, as Reverend Greg has said, it's a very human way, I think, of meeting those occasions. And people, when they leave, if the bereaved can leave a tangi, they're still burdened by the passing, but they're uplifted. And I think that's and they can move forward in a easier way than if they rushed through the process. I think that's the difference. Yeah.
I wonder if you could speak just a little bit about the High Court action that Kaitahu are taking to protect the waterways in Waipungamu, because it's close to my heart. Kia ora.
Thank you for that. During the negotiations in Wellington, particularly, it became clear that water was off the table. We may have talked about it in the early parts of the negotiations, but sitting there opposite Bolger and Doug Graham and others and our team, it was said that it's off the table. The Crown are now saying it was never on the table anyway because it's against our laws. But we agreed it's too big a thing to deal with. We had a defined set of issues we wanted to settle and put it off for another day. And of course, water issues have continued to worsen across our tribal territory, so it's just heightened the concern and reminded us of that time, put it off for another day. So the process was restarted by the tribe, probably around 2018, set up a small team, took it out of Tront to be run by a dedicated team, because Tront is too big and cumbersome to run a big case like that in the way we wanted it run. And Te Māori Tau is running that, heading that. And so we lodged the claim in 2020. And it is over rangatiratanga. It's not over ownership. It's not about mahikakai or anything like that. It is to have our rangatiratanga recognised in a way that we understand it to be, which will require the Crown to sit down with us and regularly and work out the frameworks and how they're going to go forward and improve the situation that we have with water, which is going downhill. So that is the basis of the claim. We're well through, I think we're nearly halfway through our witnesses or our evidence. I gave mine last week on Monday, Tuesday, and I was watching some online today. Yes, going quite well, but we've yet to hear the Crown case fully, but that's in the High Court. We'll see where the judge will make there's a single judge, Judge Harland, who is presiding, and we'll await her judgment. So that's that. We think what we're doing, if we are successful, will be good for all the South Island. It'll probably set models, templates perhaps for the North Island, but we think it's good for the nation as well. We don't do things that are only good for us. It's got to be a win-win.
Well, I think at that juncture, Edward, a very good piece of timing. More than that, a lovely piece of information giving, enlightening all of us Kauiwi about things we ought to know. And we have a small token for you in response to your talk. And thank you for coming. And I hope you can show your appreciation. The next talk, if everything goes according to Hoyle, will be on the third Wednesday of April, which will be about the 19th or so of April. And you to be advised that we haven't yet chosen who is the speaker. We have a person in our sights, but we can't say anything yet. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
David,